there are a few things that you can sometimes see coming within a party. That one threw me for a loop.
Yeah.
Because the Democratic Party is many things that I don't like, but one of the things that I think was redeeming about it was that it, for a long time, had, or at least professed, a natural resistance or reluctance to get into war needlessly. It's a little bit like when we've had some Republicans in recent years become huge fans of tariffs. I'm not among them. Tariffs are taxes. You know, they've got their place. But for the most part, we believe in free market economics. But war among the Democratic Party, that's a big foreboding. I mean, how on earth how did we get there? Are you as shocked as I am that we're there?
I was really surprised to see, that throughout this whole period of time over this past year, not a single Democrat voted against sending tens of billions of dollars to escalate this war with Russia. Not a single Democrat, even those who consider themselves progressives and champions for peace, not a single one of them has warned about the risk of nuclear war, given we're dealing with a nuclear-armed country in Russia heads than we do. They've been silent. That surprised me. And when they sent that letter out on the 24th, I was like, my gosh, finally. And then literally the very next morning, they're like, oh no, actually, we didn't mean that.
Those darn rogue staffers. You know. There was a Harvard professor, I believe his name is Roger Porter, has some Utah ties. About 25 or 30 years ago, he wrote a book called War and the Rise of the State. He explained that war has something of a one-way ratchet effect on the size, scope, reach, and cost of government. You think that's sort of infected them? Regardless of whether they've read Professor Porter's book, could they have become drunk with the idea of expanding government through war?
Yeah, I think that's right. And when you look at as a means for our government to try to take more of our, they're very rarely given back. And Mike, I know you've talked a lot about in protecting our civil liberties and protecting our freedom, and really looking again at how we can protect and defend the Constitution away from the erosion that we're seeing.
We're gonna cancel these other microphones the same way the left cancels us, and we're gonna.
All right, here we go. That works. I think this, Mike, if you could talk about, because you know, oftentimes when people look at the news and they're watching what's going on in Washington, it is very polarized. It is very partisan. But I think in our heart of hearts, we really want a functional government where, even though we may disagree on different issues, that we have people who are interested in solving problems. And I wonder if you can talk about some of the things that you've done really over the years where you've demonstrated that putting the people of Utah, putting the people of this country ahead of whatever the party interests are.
No, thanks for asking about that. These are some of the more rewarding moments you have in Congress is when you have an idea. An idea that, for me, usually starts with a problem people are experiencing. And 9 times out of 10, that problem is caused by the federal government. And we've got to figure out a way to rein it in so that it can stop causing that problem. Because we have an amazing country. Our country is wonderful. It's the federal government that is very often the problem. But the government works for us, and so we can turn it around. Shortly after I got to the Senate, I started in...
Can I just stop you? I want to highlight, bold, and underline what he just said. The government works for us. So, I apologize for interrupting, but this is why we're all here. Because sometimes, well, they want us to forget that. The government works for us, so we can solve those problems. With the election just a few days away, I hope all of you remember this as you go out and talk to your friends and family, and remind them, if you're frustrated with the way things are and you want change, the government works for us, so we can change that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's good. When I first got to the Senate, I found myself assigned to the Judiciary Committee, and the words of a federal judge in Salt Lake City were still echoing in my mind. Federal District Judge Paul Cassell, who said only Congress can fix this problem. He was referring to a man named Weldon Angelos, whom he had just sentenced to 55 years in prison. This guy, Weldon Angelos, sold 3 dime bags of pot to an undercover informant over a 72-hour period. And because of the way he was charged and because he had a gun on his person at the time, didn't brandish or discharge it or anything, just had it on his person, the 3 strikes laws, the way they've been interpreted and the way they were applied in that case, produced a 55-year minimum mandatory sentence. The judge said, this is ridiculous. There are rapists, there are murderers, there are hijackers, terrorists who don't get this much time, but I've got no choice but to do this because of this minimum mandatory sentence. We discovered that there were a lot of other examples of unintended consequences. So I started looking for allies. I knew I wouldn't find any among my Republican colleagues, so I went out and found a really liberal Democrat on the committee, went to Dick Durbin from Illinois, and our first meeting about it was, Dick, we got a problem, let's deal with this. And we were whispering the entire time, and at the end of this meeting, he said, well, let's do this thing. It's probably suicide for both of us politically, but let's do it anyway. And I said, great, why are we still whispering? And so initially it was just me and Dick Durbin. We got a lot of Democrats on board. It was me and a bunch of liberal Democrats at first. Rand Paul eventually joined in. Then Cory Booker came to the Senate, and he joined in the effort. And we were making progress. Barack Obama was president at the time. He was excited about it. And in fact, he called me one day. I was on the way to Idaho with my family, and my secretary called and said, the president is going to call you. And I said, the president of what? I didn't know that was a thing. Anyway, eventually we got to the point where they were saying, we're close, but we don't think we can get past 60, because you have to get 60 votes to bring debate to a close in order to pass most bills. And they said, we'll never get past 60 because we won't get enough Republicans. And I said, we will. We'll get to 60. I think I can get us to 65. They thought I was crazy. It took us 8 years. We passed that sucker with 87 votes. Would have been 88, but Lindsey Graham went out of town. So examples like that and ending the government's surveillance of the American people for the bulk telephone metadata collection program, that was me and a bunch of liberal Democrats, and then it passed.
I think these examples are important for us to be reminded of, and how long it can take to actually solve these problems, but having that persistence and that focus and that ability to reach across and work with people who you may disagree with on many, many other issues, and frankly be willing to take the arrows and hits that come with it, both from maybe your colleagues, but also maybe even some critics here at home. That's leadership, and that's what we need more than ever. One of the things that has concerned me so greatly about the leaders of today's Democrat Party is their constant assault on freedom. Whether we're talking about freedom of speech, freedom of religion, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, you can go down the list. This party has become, it was once a party that defended freedom of speech, even the most abhorrent, terrible speech. It has now become a party that says if you don't toe the party line, if you don't agree with and buy into and scream and shout whatever the narrative of the day is, then you don't belong in the party, and they will try to silence you and shut you up. I can speak from personal experience. The dangerous thing is that they have the force of law behind them, and they work with big tech to enforce this, leaving some of these people, both in academia and in politics, saying, well, the First Amendment, maybe not so relevant, because speech is violence, there's misinformation and disinformation, and only the people in power, them, get to determine what information and speech is acceptable. What is hate speech or what is not? What is disinformation and what is not? So you are the constitutional guy. Given all of your background, even before the Senate, I wonder if you can talk about the relevance and importance of the First Amendment today in our society.
It's really significant that the First Amendment was listed first in the Bill of Rights. It contains a bunch of freedoms that are in many ways upstream from the other prohibitions in the Bill of Rights. The fact that we're there to tell the government, the federal government, that it can't make any laws that affect how you worship, what you say, what you print in your newspaper, whether, when, how you assemble, and that we're not going to have an established religion, an established national church. Those are upstream from so many others in so many ways. And that's it's not to say that it is the only important provision of the Constitution or in the Bill of Rights, but it's an unusually important one. One of the first conversations that I remember having with you in my office, where I think after we had had some initial conversations about war powers, was that you and I were both concerned about religious freedom. We've seen what happens as government gets bigger and bigger, as it becomes more powerful. And I've sometimes, my staff hates it when I use this example, but it's like, anybody see the original Ghostbusters movie? Do you remember the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, and when he makes an appearance at the very end and he's stepping on a church and it's destroying the church and people are all upset? You remember that part? That's religious freedom. The government is the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, and he steps on the church not because he hates church necessarily, but because he's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, and he's huge and he's clumsy and he doesn't really care about church, and the church just happens to be in the way. That's what government does. It tramples on your rights, and it often starts with religious freedom. Because when the government discriminates against you on the basis of not just what you do, but who you are, and your religious beliefs cut closer to who you are than perhaps any other single characteristic we can think of, bad things happen. Now, you and I share many things in common, including the fact that we're both heretics. We've both been heretics within our own party. We both have religious beliefs that are not in the mainstream in America. So we know what it feels like to be a heretic, but so did the Founding Fathers. We're a country of freaking heretics, and we've got to stand up for each other.